The MLS Cup playoffs are awesome. It's literally all I've been thinking about for the past like 3 weeks. Now, I know that the European mind can't really wrap their head around what the playoffs are, how they work, so let me give you guys just a quick little rundown before we get into what's been happening. So, the MLS consists of 30 teams, and it's divided in two. We have the Eastern Conference and the Western Conference, both with 15 teams. Now, throughout the season, you'll play everybody in your conference twice, once at home and once away, just like any other league in the world. But then you'll also play 6 teams from the West, 3 at home, 3 away. This year, for example, my home team, the New York Red Bulls, we played Sporting Kansas City, Vancouver, and FC Dallas at home, Colorado, LAFC, and the Houston Dynamo away, on top of the other 14 games that we played within the conference, giving us 34 games in the season. Now, after your 34 games, points are calculated, and we have 2 standings, the Eastern Conference standings and the Western Conference standings. Now, the team with the most points over both the East and the West, so the most points in the MLS period, are crowned Supporter Shield winners, aka champions in any other league, but for the sake of now, they're not actually the MLS champions, they're just the champions of the regular season. And this year it was Inter Miami with 74 points, meaning the most points in the MLS, which anywhere else would mean a championship, but here it's just a Supporter Shield. Now, I say just because it's not the most prestigious tournament in the MLS. That would be the MLS Cup. But how do you win the MLS Cup? And that right there is where the playoffs come in, because in the East and in the West we have 1 through 15. And the rules for the MLS playoffs have changed throughout the years. Some people like them, some people don't. As everything in life. And some people call it just a money grab. But here's how they are currently set up. Teams ranked 1 through 7 are automatically into the playoffs, while teams ranked 8th and 9th play 1 game to try to get into the playoffs as the 8th seed, the 8th seed being home. This year in the Eastern Conference, the 8th and 9th were Montreal and Atlanta. Atlanta, who on the very last day of the season had a 10% chance of making the playoffs and actually had the same amount of points as DC United, but went through on goal differential. Remember, 10% chance of even getting into the playoffs, because remember that, because that's going to come back later to be very important. And then in the West, we had Vancouver and Portland, meaning that Portland went to Vancouver, but even then, there was a little bit of controversy this year because Portland actually had to play in Portland because they couldn't play in Vancouver. It was a mess. So now that we get all of that out of the way, let's get into the MLS playoff bracket. So once 8 and 9 play each other, this year it was Montreal and Atlanta actually beat Montreal in Montreal to get in. Then the first team plays the 8th team, the second plays the 7th, the third plays the 6th, and the fourth play the 5th. First being on one side of the bracket and the second being on the other. And that is how we get the Eastern Conference and the Western Conference brackets. Now we're caught up. But there's still another twist because the first round of the playoffs is actually a best of 3 series. The higher ranked team, so let's say Inter Miami, the first ranked team, going against the 8th ranked team, who was actually 9th, but then won the play-in game to be the 8th, so it's now the 8th. They play Atlanta United 3 times, and you got to win 2 games to go through, but the higher ranked team gets home field advantage, meaning that they get the first and third game at home, the third game if necessary. And from there, you just keep on going through the bracket. Whoever wins that wins whoever won the other matchup, and still going with the home team being the team that's higher rated. So let's say the New York Derby, NYCFC versus the New York Red Bulls. During the regular season, NYCFC was ranked 6th. The New York Red Bulls were ranked 7th, so NYCFC will have that as a home game, even though in the first round, neither of them had home field advantage. And once the bracket is complete, we'll have somebody coming out of the East bracket, somebody coming out of the West bracket, and that is the MLS Cup final. Whoever wins that is the champion of the MLS for that year. Okay, so now that we got all of that out of the way and I did my best to explain it and hopefully everybody is on the same page, you can understand it now, let's take a look at what's been happening because these might be the craziest, wildest playoffs that I have ever seen as an MLS fan. Let's start in that Western Conference 8 versus 9 play-in game to get into the playoffs. So the way the things shook out this year, Vancouver and Portland ended 8th and 9th respectively, both with 47 points, but Vancouver actually had a better goal differential by 6, 3-9. So like I said, They were supposed to play at home. However, with issues going on in their stadium, Vancouver actually couldn't host the game. So they decided, let's actually just play the game in Portland. You guys had the same amount of points, but the goal differential should have been in Vancouver, but you guys can't play there. So we're just going to play the game in Portland. There was calls for a neutral site field. The MLS said, listen, we're not trying to do all that. We're just going to play the game in Portland. What did Vancouver do? They said, hey, no worries. Anytime, any place, anywhere, pull up to Portland in a game that was supposed to be a home game, ends up being an away game, and the game is over within 30 minutes as Vancouver was already up 3-0, end up beating Portland 5-0. And the talks between the coaches, absolute cinema. And then let's talk about that playing game on the Eastern Conference between Montreal and Atlanta United. Atlanta United, who again, like I said in the beginning of the video, had a 10% chance of even making it to this play-in game. Just listen to what had to happen on the final day of play in the MLS regular season. So Atlanta finished the year off with two back-to-back wins, I should say, not straight wins. They beat the Red Bulls, and in the very last day, they would go on to beat Orlando City. Orlando City, who they're about to play again in the play. This Atlanta United story this year, you could write movies about this. But what had to happen? DC United had to lose, Toronto had to lose, Philadelphia had to lose, and they had to win. 4 results had to go their way just to be in this play-in game. Well, guess what? It all happened, okay? Atlanta beat Orlando City. DC United lost. Toronto lost. Philadelphia lost. Atlanta United said, oh my God, no way. After letting go of like 2 or 3 massive players during the year who went off into Europe, it looked like they were just punting on the season. It looked like they were saying, you know what? Let's just sell off who we have. Let's rebuild. And now they made the biggest story in literally the MLS ever, okay? But now let's go back to this playing game. So they're playing Montreal in Montreal, and the game could not have started better. Scored in the 29th, scored in the 44th. They go into halftime up 2-0 against Montreal. And who is Montreal's striker? None other than Joseph Martinez, who used to play for Atlanta United with Atlanta United and actually won Atlanta United's first ever MLS Cup with the club. But this time he was on the other side of the story with Montreal, and he would score in the 63rd minute. Things start getting a little shaky in Montreal. And then in the 89th minute, they are 2 minutes away from going 10% chance of being in the playoffs to winning a play-in game. Penalty for Montreal. Who else? Joseph Martinez steps up, buries the pens, and we're tied at 2. Now again, there is no extra time. This is going straight into penalties. And what does Atlanta United do? Until the very last kick of the ball, win the penalties 5-4. Congratulations. You're now the 8th seed, and you get to play Inter Miami. Absolute drama on both sides in the play-in games. The playoffs technically haven't even started, but now the brackets are set, and things just get crazier. Okay, so now we're officially into the playoffs, okay? First game of the playoffs, obviously they're going to make it into Miami. They're going to make it Messi. The MLS wants the eyes on us. Hey, the playoffs started. You guys start paying attention to us, and it all goes normal. Luis Suarez scores in the 2nd minute. It's looking like it's going to be an absolute rout. Atlanta fully out of the water, playing in Miami against Miami. A couple of days removed from playing that play-in game. But then Atlanta United actually scored in the 39th minute. Tied game for a long time. Jordi Alba comes through, scores in the 60th. It's all normal. It's all okay. No upsets yet. Okay, then we go into day 2 of the playoffs. And again, we still only have one game. LA Galaxy versus Colorado. Blowout. 5-0. Everything is going according to plan. And then the MLS playoffs keep rolling. Orlando City versus Charlotte. This is supposed to be quote-unquote the closest matchup because it's that 4 versus 5. So they're the closest in the table. Orlando City takes care of business game 1 in Orlando, beats Charlotte 2-0, and Pepe Biel, a key piece of that Charlotte team, gets a red card in the 91st minute. Starting to look tough for Charlotte. Then we've got the 1-8 matchup in the West, and LAFC cruise through the game, up 2-0 in the 94th minute. Vancouver scores 2-1. It's all okay. All of the higher ranked seeds have a 1-0 lead in the series and looking like they're going to make it to the second round. We keep rolling. In the East, we've got 3 ranked Cincinnati versus 6th ranked NYCFC. Cincinnati picks up a very, very, very close win. 1-0. Tavon Gray fullback for NYCFC, gets a red card in the 98th minute. It's looking like Cincinnati's got all of the advantages. In the West, we've got that 4-5 matchup. Again, the closest matchup supposedly in these playoffs, that 4 versus 5. Seattle Sounders versus the Houston Dynamo. Houston Dynamo get a red card in like the 65th, 66th minute. They take it all the way to pens. They hold on in Seattle. But again, still no upset. Seattle ends up winning it on pens 5-4. Then the upsets start coming in. They start with who else but my New York Red Bulls. Finished 7th throughout the season. So this is a 2 versus 7. New York Red Bulls versus the Columbus Crew. The Columbus Crew who have beat Inter Miami in finals. The only team touted as the MLS that can really challenge Inter Miami. It was either going to be them to challenge Inter Miami or Cincinnati. These are the only teams that can beat them in the East. Well, the New York Red Bulls pull up to Columbus and pull out a hearty 1-0 win. Felipe Carballo, first goal ever in the MLS. What a time for it to come, and we've officially got the first upset. The 7th-ranked Red Bulls beat the 2nd-ranked Columbus. And then in the West, on the same night, we've got Real Salt Lake, who was 3rd, versus Minnesota, who was 6th. Again, not supposed to be close. Minnesota pulls up to Real Salt Lake, keeps the game tied 0-0, and then in penalties, beats them 5-4. The day of the upsets. And what it would start is out of this world. So by this point, every team has played that first game in the best of 3 series. Only those 2 upsets coming on the last day of those round one game 1 days, with the Red Bulls beating Columbus and Minnesota beating Real Salt Lake. Well, now the lower ranked teams are all going back home. Those 2 that I just mentioned with the upset, with a chance to clinch their path into the 2nd round of the playoffs at home, and the other teams who lost to the higher ranked seed coming back home, just trying to keep their season alive, just trying to maybe squeak out a win and then go back to the higher ranked team's stadium and try to close out there. So we start with Orlando, now going back to Charlotte, trying to beat Charlotte. Charlotte trying to keep their season alive. Very, very, very tight game. 0-0 after 90 minutes. Now, if they played these 2 games and it was aggregate, Orlando would go through. But again, it's not. And the game goes to pens, and Charlotte wins it 3-1, tying the series 1-1, going back to Orlando to play the mighty Game 3 to see who goes through. On the other side in the West, the LA Galaxy steamroll Colorado 4-1. Colorado is officially out, and LA Galaxy are the first team to stamp their way into the 2nd round of the playoffs. All right, so now we go back to New York City. It's NYCFC versus Cincinnati, that mighty Game 2. And the Cincinnati coach talking before the game, listen, it's not ideal. We have to play in a baseball stadium. Sort of already making excuses, looking like, hey, if we do lose this game, it's because we're playing in a baseball stadium and not into a soccer stadium. So it seems like the doubt maybe started creeping in for Cincinnati. Well, NYCFC with a massive 3-1 win at home. This series is going back to Cincinnati, tied at 1. NYCFC trying to shock the world. And speaking of shocking the world, Inter Miami and Messi are going back to Atlanta to play a game versus Atlanta United. Again, 10% chance of getting in. I'm going to keep bringing this up because you guys have probably already seen what happened, but this still boggles my mind. And even when Messi first came to the MLS, Atlanta United was one of those situations that it was like, we don't know if Messi's actually going to come play away games here because they play on artificial grass in a football stadium made for the Atlanta Falcons. So there was a lot of speculation. Is Messi going to play here? Is Messi not? Well, in the playoffs, obviously, Messi is going to play. And Inter Miami would actually score first in the 40th minute with David Martinez. Atlanta United strike back in the 58th minute with Derek Williams. So 1-1 game until the very last moment. It's like the 93rd minute. It's looking like it's going to be penalties. Can Atlanta keep their season alive in penalties? Can they not? Well, guess what? There is no need for penalties because Xande Silva, my Portuguese brother, delivers massively, scores in the 94th minute. Stadium erupts, and it seems like this is where things started to change. This is when Atlanta started to believe maybe we can shock the world. Atlanta ties the series up. Again, 1 versus 8. Technically 1 versus 9. Atlanta United is going back to Miami to try to shock the world. On the other side, in the West, we got Minnesota versus Real Salt Lake. Minnesota looking for the upset, and they actually go up 5-3 after already beating RSL in Real Salt Lake. They're coming back home, trying to just finish off the season, trying to pull off one of the biggest upsets in the West. Well, they score in the 53rd minute. Real Salt Lake, 75th minute. They score. It's now tied 1-1. And the Canadian Wonder Boy, David St. Clair, pulls up massively in the penalties. Minnesota beats Real Salt Lake 3-1. We get the "it's over" meme. It's over. Minnesota upsets Real Salt Lake. The first upset to get their way in to round 2 of the playoffs. But the upsets are only beginning, and they would only get crazier because my New York Red Bulls are coming back home to play the Columbus Crew in that 2-7 after beating Columbus in Columbus. And at that time, if the Red Bulls were to pull this off, it would be the biggest upset in MLS playoff history. And now, obviously, if you follow this channel, you probably already know how that went because I vlogged the whole thing of going to the game and me watching the penalties in that game, which, by the way, thank you guys so much for the support that you guys have been showing on that vlog. Everybody that I've met at the stadium, it all proves to me why I do this and why I make these videos. So again, thank you guys so much for the support. But for those who didn't watch it, go watch it. But it would all start off so poorly for the New York Red Bulls. 0-0 at half. Maximilian Stefan scores in the 55th minute. Columbus Crew take the 1-0 lead, which everybody around the MLS was kind of expecting. Okay, the Red Bulls got lucky in that game 1, but then Dante Van Zier scores in the 64th minute to tie it all up again. Now we're into the 80th minute, and it's looking like it's going to be penalties. But wait, there's actually a penalty within the 90 minutes. Penalty for the Red Bulls. Emil Forsberg steps up. 80th minute, it is a 2-1 game. The Red Bulls are 10 minutes away from shocking the world. But then things would all take a turn for the Red Bulls because the fourth official would give 12 minutes of added time. And the feel in the stadium was like, how is this 12 minutes? Why is it 12 minutes? And the Red Bulls aren't able to hold on for 12 minutes. In the 96th minute, Christian Ramirez scores. So again, it's looking like we're going into penalties. But fear not, because the mighty Carlos Coronel would block 3 penalties in a row to secure a 5-4 win for the New York Red Bulls. The 7th seed eliminates the 2nd seed, the biggest upset in MLS playoff history. In the West, we would have some more penalties because Houston Dynamo taking on the Seattle Sounders. Houston Dynamo, who had already lost in Seattle, coming back home, trying to keep their season alive. 1-1 game. Houston Dynamo again gets a red card in this game. I'm not really sure what minute it was at. The 66th minute. Houston Dynamo, back-to-back games in the playoffs against the mighty Seattle Sounders, getting red cards in the 60th minute. But again, just like last game where they would go into the 60th minute with a red card, it goes to penalties. Seattle Sounders beat the Houston Dynamo on penalties. The Dynamo are officially eliminated from playoff contention. And then out west, Vancouver, we already talked about how the fact that they couldn't play their play-in home game. Well, now they're actually going back to Vancouver to take on LAFC, and they said welcome back to Canada. 3-0. Are they on the verge of upsetting LAFC? Things are starting to get wicked. But then 5 days later, this past Friday, 2 days ago, LAFC versus Vancouver back in LA. LA trying not to be the shock in the West, and they actually end up scoring in the 62nd minute. They would beat Vancouver 1-0 in a game where Vancouver didn't give much, but they also didn't let LAFC have much. So LAFC goes through, Vancouver out. Things are happening. And then yesterday, when I tell you that I was glued to Apple TV all day yesterday, it started at like 4 p.m. And obviously I was going to watch the game because whoever won between NYCFC versus FC Cincinnati would end up playing the New York Red Bulls. And honestly, I was hoping for NYCFC. I've been telling everybody all week that I wanted NYCFC simply for the fact that it's a derby and the game would be in New York and not in Ohio, which means we can get out another vlog. So expect another vlog. If you're planning on going to the game, let me know. Let's go together. Let's take the train together. Let's have a good time. If you want to pull up, be in the vlog, by all means, be my guest. I would love to have you guys. But anyway, enough yapping. Cincinnati versus NYCFC. Cincinnati trying to hold on at TQL Stadium, and it goes 0-0. And then, honestly, it goes into penalties, and nobody wanted to score. I'm pretty sure each team missed 3 penalties in a row. Matt Freese had the game of his life. I think that Matt Freese is going to be the U.S. men's national team goalie by the time that the World Cup comes around, but he was absolutely standing on his head last night. Comes up massive. NYCFC beats FC Cincinnati. The upsets keep on going in the East. 6th ranked NYCFC has beaten and eliminated 3-ranked FC Cincinnati, but it wouldn't even be the biggest upset on the day. Because now let's take a look at that Orlando City versus Charlotte, that 4 versus 5 matchup. Orlando wins in Orlando. Charlotte wins in Charlotte on penalties. And in the 81st minute, Charlotte takes a 1-0 lead over Orlando City, and it looks like they're going to be able to flip the script. It looks like the 5 is going to eliminate the 4. But then, in the 90 plus 12, Charlotte was like seconds away from pulling off the upset. Penalty for Orlando City. Facundo Torres shoots the penalty. Slonina, or whatever the guy's name is, blocks the penalty, but the rebound falls perfectly for Facundo Torres. Facundo Torres buries it. 1-1 game. We're going to penalties. And Galese, the Orlando City goalkeeper, comes up massive, blocking 3 penalties against Charlotte. Orlando City goes through 4-1. And now we have the match that everybody wanted to watch. Atlanta, after beating Inter Miami in the 94th minute, after having a 10% chance of making the playoffs. I'm going to keep on saying it, 10% chance. And this game started off hot. Inter Miami scores in the 17th minute with Matias Rojas. It's looking like, okay, Inter Miami is just going to be able to fly away with this. Same thing happened in the first game in Miami when they scored in the second. But then Jamal Tiare scores in the 19th minute, ties it up. A mere 2 minutes later, in the 21st minute, he would score again, a brace in 2 minutes. Inter Miami now down 2-1. And then Inter Miami scored in the 23rd minute. So we're looking at 17, 19, 21, 23 goals. But it would get called off by VAR for being offside. Now, Atlanta going into half up 2-1 against Inter Miami. But do you think Inter Miami are going to go down without a fight? You must be out of your mind. Lionel Messi scores his first ever MLS playoff goal in the 65th minute. But then Bartosz Slizzes in the 76th minute scores for Atlanta. Atlanta up 3-2. And they would be able to hold on and knock off the mighty Inter Miami and Lionel Messi. The biggest upset ever in playoffs history, taken away from my New York Red Bulls. Okay, the New York Red Bulls, listen, we had the best upset in Major League history for like a good week, okay? But now Inter Miami have been eliminated, meaning that the first, second, and third seed in the East have all been eliminated and upset. The not Community Shield, the Supporter Shield winners, Inter Miami, had been knocked out. So I decided to do a little bit of digging. I decided to look at a couple of stats, and only eight out of the previous 29 Supporter Shield winners actually went on to win the MLS Cup. That's about 27%, which is about 1 out of every 4 Supporter Shield teams have actually went on and won the MLS Cup. Obviously, 3 of those losses come from my New York Red Bulls. Yes, we've technically won the league, but so listen, Inter Miami, I know how it feels. Trust me. But the MLS playoffs are awesome. Absolute cinema. Absolute cinema. In the words of 50 Cent, hated or love it, the underdogs is on top. And I am absolutely loving this. The only part that I don't like is that we have to wait 2 weeks because I want this to start, and I want it to start now. Now, let's take a quick little look at the matchups that we have coming up. First and foremost, we have our first ever New York derby taking place in the playoffs. NYCFC versus the New York Red Bulls. And honestly, I'm hoping for the drama and the upsets to continue. We've already lost twice to them. We lost in the stadium that we're playing in, Citi Field, 2-1 after getting a red card. And then they came to us and they beat us 5-1 at our stadium. I am hoping for the get back. Columbus had beat us twice already throughout the season. We would upset them in the playoffs. Obviously, we're going to be vlogging the whole thing. If you guys are here from the game, hit me up. Let's take the train together. Let's do this together. I've been saying this all along, all playoffs. Why not us? Why not now? In the West, we've got the LAFC versus the Seattle Sounders. Now, I'm expecting LAFC to win, but if anything throughout these playoffs, we have absolutely no idea. This is upset central. Back to the East, we have Orlando City versus Atlanta United. These are the Sunday games for 2 weeks from now. That'll be on the 24th. I'm hoping that Atlanta United keeps on going, because if Atlanta United wins, they would be the lowest seed. So if the New York Red Bulls win, we could be back at Red Bull Arena for an Eastern Conference final. And honestly, I'm gonna keep vlogging the whole thing if you guys keep showing the support that you guys have been showing. But I do think that Orlando City is gonna be able to do it. But why not Atlanta go through and just do the clean sweep of Florida, beat Miami, beat Orlando, and then back out west, LA Galaxy versus Minnesota. Minnesota coming off of that upset against Real Salt Lake, trying to play the LA Galaxy. Will it be enough? LA Galaxy has been like out of commission for like 3 weeks at this point. The Red Bulls haven't played in 3 weeks. That's like the only downfall, I feel, of winning that best of 3 in 2 games. You take the week off because everybody else is playing the third game. Then you take another week off because of international duty. So at that point that you step onto the pitch, you'll be 3 weeks removed from being in a game. I don't love it, but I get it. I'm also hoping that nobody goes to the international break and gets injured. Obviously, you never want anybody to get injured, period. But especially during such an important time for the MLS. But the MLS playoffs are alive. I'm absolutely loving it. I'm hoping that you guys are enjoying it as well. If you haven't been watching, tune in, watch. These games go to penalties. These games get crazy. Goals everywhere, no goals everywhere. It's just been awesome. But as always, I appreciate you guys for watching this video. If you haven't done so yet, make sure to hit the like, comment, subscribe. Who do you guys think is winning the MLS Cup? And Saturday, November 23rd. See you guys at Citi Field. Peace.